I woke up in the hospital to the faint, sterile scent of antiseptic and the steady beeping of monitors echoing somewhere at the end of the hallway. My chest throbbed sharply every time I tried to take a breath, as if each rib were slicing inward with its own quiet cruelty. It was the lingering ache from Kyle's fists only a few hours earlier, the last flare-up of yet another meaningless argument that had become the rhythm of our months. He had shouted over a burnt plate of barbecue, over a message I received from a coworker, over anything that made him feel I was not obedient enough. His voice always grew louder while mine shrank further into nothing. Claire had cried in fear upstairs in her bedroom, and I had curled my body inward, trying to protect the parts that would hurt the worst when he hit. When I tried to sit up, a wave of pain rose so violently that my vision went dark around the edges. The doctor said I had 3 ribs, severely bruised, possibly 1 cracked, but the thing that made my stomach twist wasn't the injury, it was the emptiness. When I looked at the chair beside my bed, Claire, my 13-year-old daughter, was gone. I noticed my phone lying face down on the small metal table beside me. With trembling hands, I reached for it and lit up the screen. 2:43 in the morning. I had signed the papers to leave the hospital against recommendations, because the bill had already climbed beyond anything I could manage, and because I needed to go home, needed to show up for the morning shift at the Hale house by 6. I had never missed a day, not once. For nearly 5 years, Adrian Hale had employed me as a housekeeper. The steady paychecks from that vast estate were the lifeline that kept my daughter and me afloat through the worst months. I knew that if I failed to show up without calling, I would lose the job. I called home. The phone rang 6 times before dropping into voicemail. I called again. Still nothing. A cold fear crept into my throat, like an icy hand. I tried the neighbor's number, but there was no answer there either. Before I could think any further, a nurse walked in, her eyes a little tired, and told me that Claire had left the hospital about 2 hours earlier, saying she needed to run home to grab some of my things. She said my daughter had been calm, clear in her words, and insistent that no one stop her. I pulled the IV from my arm, ignoring the nurse's protests, ignoring the way the room began to tilt and spin. I knew one thing. Claire would never leave like that unless something terrible had driven her to. I called her again as I stepped into the elevator. No answer. I called home. No answer. And in that moment, as the elevator rumbled downward, understanding hit me. Claire had not gone home. Not in the middle of the night. Not while I lay in a hospital bed. Not when she feared the shadow of Kyle the way others feared monsters in their nightmares. She had gone to work in my place. She had gone to the Hale estate, a place no child had any business entering alone. It took me nearly 30 minutes to drive from the hospital to the wealthy neighborhood where Adrian lived. Dust stung my eyes, and every bump on the road sent a jolt of agony through my ribs. When I reached the back gate of the enormous property, the kitchen lights spilled out across the yard, and I saw something I never wanted to see: movement inside. My hands shook as I reached for the door, but it opened from the inside first. It was Daniel, Adrian's most trusted guard, the man who was always silent, always steady, always making me feel small without meaning to. He looked at me with an expression that held no surprise. "Miss Carter, Mr. Hale was just about to send someone to pick you up. Where is my daughter?" I rasped, my voice breaking. "She's in the kitchen with Mr. Hale. Please, come in." I stumbled into the familiar kitchen, the one I had cleaned thousands of times. Claire sat curled on a wooden chair, wrapped in a blanket that wasn't ours. Her small wrists peeked out from the rolled sleeves, yellow, purple bruises, distinct fingerprints still visible. And standing beside her, one hand resting lightly on the back of her chair, was Adrian Hale, the man I had barely spoken more than 2 sentences to in all the years I'd worked for him. The man whispered about in rumors, powerful, dangerous, merciless. His eyes met mine, dark and deep, and something inside me froze. For the first time in my life, I understood something terrible had begun. Claire had not simply gone to work for me. She had gone to the one person she believed could protect us from Kyle. And now, beneath the harsh kitchen light, I knew Adrian Hale would not let things return to the way they had been. Somehow, he had become the final barrier between my daughter and me, and the darkness I had taught myself to live with. But no, this time, Adrian did not look like a man who intended to stand by. And if you're still listening and this story touches something in you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Like and share this video so we can keep bringing you more heartfelt stories every day. And if you don't mind, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We treasure every single word you share. The night air over Seattle was covered in a thin veil of mist, silent and cold, like the breath of a nightmare that hadn't yet released its hold. I stood in the wide kitchen, my legs numb, the overhead light making Claire's pale face look even smaller. I had never seen her like this, not even during Kyle's worst rages. Claire had always tried to appear strong for me, always quiet, always disappearing into books or headphones to block out the arguments. But now she sat there gripping a cup of hot chocolate with trembling hands, eyes red, shoulders tight. Adrian still hadn't moved from her side. He stood tall, and still, saying nothing, as if guarding her from anything that dared come close. His eyes met mine again, silent, fathomless, strangely absent of judgment. I wanted to run to her, to wrap my arms around her, but a part of me was afraid that if I touched her, I would break. I dragged a chair close and sat slowly, grinding my teeth as pain snapped through my ribs. Claire glanced at me, her lips quivering. "I'm sorry, Mom. I just wanted to help." Her voice sounded as though she had lived a whole lifetime in the span of a night. I forced a smile and squeezed her hand, but Adrian's gaze made me lift my head. He pulled out a chair across from me and sat down. It was the first time he had ever sat at a table with me, not as employer and employee, but as two people thrust into the same battlefield. "Claire has told me everything," he said, each word calm and carefully measured. I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. Somewhere in the distance, the living room clock chimed, 3 times, signaling the coming dawn. I suddenly remembered my shift, the timesheet, the uniform still unwashed. I muttered, "I have to go. I need to work. I can't lose my job." Adrian watched me, expression unchanged. "You will not work today, or tomorrow." I froze. "Your daughter needs her mother, and you need rest." I started to argue, but he lifted a hand, not in anger, just firm finality. "I've called a doctor to come here. You need proper care. Claire will stay here. And if you're worried about the cost, don't. I've taken care of it." No hesitation, no unnecessary explanation. I felt small, useless, ashamed. I wasn't used to receiving help. I didn't know how to react to kindness, especially from someone like Adrian Hale. I'd heard the whispers, Mafia, underworld, a man without a heart. But the man before me, the man placing his hand gently on my daughter's shoulder, as if she were a fragile part of his own breath, did not fit the rumors. I bowed my head and whispered, "Thank you." Adrian stood, gestured to Daniel. "He'll take you back to the hospital to finish what needs to be done. When you're finished, come back here." I blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" He looked directly into my eyes. "I mean that from now on, you and your daughter will stay here." I didn't have time to question him, nor the courage. I was escorted to the car like someone who had survived a flood, barely holding on to the pieces of herself. As Daniel drove through the silent neighborhood, I looked into the rearview mirror where the kitchen light still glowed softly through the windows. Claire was still inside, and I was on my way back to the place that, for the first time in many years, might become a real home. I didn't know why Adrian was doing this. I didn't know if he had an agenda or if Claire had touched some fragile part of his heart. But I knew one thing. I was no longer standing alone in the dark, and that small truth, fleeting as it was enough to make me cry all the way back to the hospital. When the car stopped in front of the main gate of the Hale estate, my heart was still pounding so hard, it felt ready to break through my ribs. Daniel opened the door, guiding me through the entrance hall, and with each step I felt the sheer weight of the enormous mansion pressing down on me. My uneven, shuffling footsteps echoed along the polished wooden floor, each sound ringing out like a quiet alarm in the night. Claire's hand clung tightly to mine, her head resting against my shoulder, trembling in small, uneven breaths. We moved toward the kitchen, where the soft golden light shimmered over the dark wooden surfaces and the perfectly arranged utensils, something that immediately reminded me of the level of control and precision Adrian demanded in this house. And then he appeared, entering the room from the hallway leading to the dining room, his posture straight, his presence imposing, his dark eyes like bottomless wells fixed on us. For the first time, I saw Adrian Hale outside the context of work, outside the whispers, outside the filtered versions told by other staff. Everything he carried into the room radiated sheer dominance, a force that silenced the space around him, and I suddenly understood this was not an ordinary man. Claire tightened her hold on my hand but did not step back, as if she somehow knew this was the one person who could pull us away from the darkness we had just escaped. Adrian approached us, each step measured, not rushed, not slow, stopping before the kitchen table where Claire sat, curled up. He did not speak immediately. He simply stood there and looked at me, his gaze a mixture of scrutiny and intent, but without hostility. My throat tightened. I swallowed my panic, even as the stabbing pain in my chest and ribs slowed my breathing. Claire looked up at him, her eyes a blend of fear and trust, wide and unblinking. I whispered a shaky thought aloud, that she shouldn't be here alone, that she was only 13. How could a child sit in front of a man with such power without collapsing into terror? Adrian finally spoke, his voice deep, every word clear, unhesitant. He said he knew what had happened the night before, that he knew what Kyle had done, that he knew about the bruises on Claire's arms. I looked at my daughter, the bruises showing plainly in the warm kitchen light, and I realized Adrian had either witnessed them or been told in detail before I had even gathered myself enough to face the truth. He continued speaking, his tone even but heavy, as if allowing no room for contradiction. He said I would not endure any of this for even another second. I froze, my heart tightened. All the explanations I had rehearsed, the excuses for why Claire was cleaning a kitchen at 2 a.m, all collapsed beneath the weight of his certainty. Adrian moved closer, placing a hand gently on Claire's shoulder, not forcefully, just enough for her to know she was not alone. Claire closed her eyes briefly, her breathing steadying, and I realized that for the first time in months, she felt truly safe. I sank into a chair, never taking my eyes off Adrian, trying to find any sign that he was a good man, yet also painfully aware of how much power he held, enough to render me completely defenseless. He turned to me, his voice still deep but softer, saying we would go back to the hospital, that we would receive proper care, and that no one would be allowed to interfere with us anymore. I nodded, relief and confusion spreading through me in equal measure. Daniel opened the door to lead us out, but Adrian's eyes stayed fixed on us, like a sentry guarding something precious. And in that moment, I realized something. For the first time in months, I didn't feel abandoned in the darkness. For the first time, someone powerful was standing in front of us, shielding not just my daughter, but also giving me the sense that the nightmare might finally be ending. Claire exhaled softly, leaning into me, and I knew that because of Adrian Hale, we would survive this night, that we might have a chance to rise again, that safety was no longer an impossible wish. The fear was still there, but something far stronger had begun to wrap around us hope. Adrian stood tall in the kitchen, his eyes tracking every movement I made, every flinch from Claire, his silence stretching long enough to feel like he was measuring the depth of our exhaustion and terror. I tried to steady myself, though every heartbeat reminded me that the nightmare was far from over, that Kyle was still somewhere out there, an unseen threat always lurking. Adrian drew in a slow breath, his voice low and unwavering. I wanted to speak, but I didn't know where to begin. He said we would not return to our apartment in the city, not that day, not that week. He said my daughter and I would stay here, inside the Hale mansion, until everything was under control. I frowned, worry about my job, about bills, about leaving the hospital too early, rushing back all at once. But Adrian dismissed all of it with a single sharp look, cold but not angry. I saw determination in his eyes, a determination so solid no one, not even Kyle, could break through it. Claire glanced at me, her eyes wide, startled but hopeful, and I understood she recognized this as the first time she would truly be protected, not by words, but by someone whose power was real and immediate. Adrian pointed to the chair, asking us to sit, then instructed Daniel to prepare a room for us upstairs, saying everything was already ready, warm blankets, clean clothes, personal items, nothing missing. I sat in stunned silence, uneasy but touched, unaccustomed to anyone planning our safety with such detail. Adrian turned toward me, his voice softer now, saying he knew what had happened to us, that he understood the physical and emotional wounds Kyle had carved into our lives, and that he could not allow me to go back to that place. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile for Claire, trying to convince both her and myself that this decision was not an intrusion but a lifeline. Claire slowly lifted her sleeves, revealing the marks on her wrists. Adrian saw them and said nothing at first, but I noticed the way his gaze shifted from steady to cold, from calm to something like warning, as though directed at anyone who dared interfere again. I sat down, gripping Claire's hand tightly, feeling her small heartbeat against my palm, and for the first time in many months, I exhaled fully, a breath that hurt but carried hope. Adrian reminded us that during this time no one would be allowed to harm us, no one would be allowed to intervene, that all contact would go through him. And I understood that his authority was enough to turn those words into truth. Daniel guided us toward the staircase, showing us the way up to the second floor. Every wall, every hallway was lit just enough to keep darkness from creeping in. I looked at Claire and whispered that she would be safe now, that for the first time we didn't have to run, that for the first time we had a place to breathe. Claire closed her eyes and leaned her head against my shoulder, her trembling slowly easing. And in that moment, I knew Adrian's decision was not simply about protecting our bodies, it was a shelter for our battered hearts. I didn't say anything more. I simply stood beside her, watching Adrian return to the center of the kitchen, his tall, commanding silhouette both guardian and challenge to any threat that might dare cross the boundary he had just drawn. In me, fear and a fragile new faith intertwined, and I understood that we had stepped into an entirely new chapter, one where Kyle's shadow was no longer the only force shaping our lives, and where, for the first time, hope could survive even in the thickest darkness. The first days inside the Hale estate passed in a haze that felt both unfamiliar and indescribably gentle. The first time in many months that I could feel a quiet rhythm of peace slipping into every cell of my body. Claire slowly began to open up, no longer pressed against me the way she used to, but instead exploring her new room, touching every object, smiling softly at the warm light spilling through the window, a pure, unguarded smile I had not seen in months. I tried to maintain calm for both of us, though worry still gnawed at the edges of my mind. Worry about what lingered outside, about Kyle, about the pieces of our life I still couldn't control. Adrian Hale appeared only occasionally, but each time he stepped into a room, the air itself seemed to settle, a quiet force wrapping around us, making me feel, with startling certainty, that we were truly protected. Simple but complete meals were prepared for us, warm blankets, freshly laundered clothes, and Claire was even allowed to choose items she liked, things I had never dared to dream of before. I began to realize that I could breathe without hearing shouts or doors slamming. My body started to heal, the sharp stabs from my bruises still there but no longer fueled by fear. Claire helped me fold clothes, talked about the books she wanted to read, little stories that made me laugh and feel lighter. I began to dare to imagine a normal tomorrow, no running, no hiding, no flinching at every unfamiliar sound. Adrian appeared from time to time, quietly watching, teaching Claire small lessons about safety without frightening her, establishing boundaries that were both firm and tender. Daniel remained nearby, but never in a way that made me feel watched, only protected. A silent shield that made me believe Kyle had lost whatever power he once held. Claire began sleeping through the night, with no midnight sobs, no gasping awake at sudden noises, and I realized her rest was the most precious thing I had wished for. I sat by my bedroom window, looking out at the quiet city beneath the pale morning mist, and for the first time in months, I understood that we had a place to call home, a place where no one could breach our peace. Hope seeped in fragile but real, like the first ray of light piercing a thick layer of cloud, making my heart tremble with a strange mix of fear and joy. For the first time, I felt we might survive, that we could heal, that we might begin again, even if only with the smallest steps inside the Hale mansion. In the days that followed, Adrian's presence began to weave itself into our lives in subtle but profound ways, each gesture, each glance making me feel safer, and Claire too. In the mornings, when exhaustion lingered on me after a restless night, he would leave a cup of hot coffee on the table beside my chair, without a word, a quiet habit of care that warmed me more than I could admit. Claire, preparing her books for the day, would occasionally drift over to him, and Adrian would ask gently about her schoolwork, never demanding, never intimidating, and I realized she was beginning to trust him, her smile becoming more natural. When he passed through the kitchen, he would pause to ask if I needed anything, sometimes only offering a look, a brief curve of a smile, and my heart would still for a moment, reminded that we didn't have to shoulder everything alone. When Claire prepared breakfast, Adrian stood beside her, guiding her with quiet suggestions, even letting her decide how to arrange the food so that she could feel a sense of control in a world that had taken so much from her. I watched from a distance, my heart aching in a tender way as I saw her laugh, her eyes bright, recognizing that this was the first time in months she felt she mattered, felt safe, felt seen. One afternoon, Adrian took us out to the back garden, the faint sunlight filtering through the leaves, a soft breeze lifting Claire's hair, and he simply stood nearby, letting us wander, though his eyes stayed on us at all times, a protective presence that eased something deep inside me. Small moments like that gradually dissolved the remnants of lingering fear, and I found myself breathing deeper without bracing for danger, found Claire smiling without hiding her hurt beneath a mask. When evening came, Adrian would sit with us in the living room, reading or quietly watching while Claire played, and I felt a peace I had never known, a place where I could sit with my arm around my daughter, feeling her steady breaths, knowing nothing threatened us in that moment. I realized that the connection forming between us and Adrian was not just protection, it was trust, the feeling that we could lean on a strong man without fear, that he stayed not for power or gain but out of genuine care. Claire began sharing little stories, thoughts she had never spoken aloud before, and Adrian listened, sometimes asking gentle questions, never imposing, making me understand that both of us were being seen and understood. I watched those moments with a swelling heart, and for the first time in months, I believed we could build a new life, one where fear gave way to trust and hope, and where Adrian Hale, the powerful man who once seemed distant, had become an irreplaceable part of the peace we were beginning to find. That night, as the warm golden lights inside the Hale mansion softened into quiet shadows and the house settled into its nighttime calm, a strange sound echoed through the hallway. It wasn't the shatter of a window or the stealthy footsteps that haunted my nightmares. It was a sharp, cold beep from the security control panel mounted on the wall. A heartbeat later, the entire back of the estate lit up. High-powered floodlights switched on all at once, tearing open the night, turning the garden bright as day. Claire, sleeping soundly in her bed, stirred as the light slipped through the curtains. I gently pulled the blanket over her before springing to my feet, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Primitive fear surged through me, and the first thought that struck like lightning was Kyle. He had found us. He was outside, wild and drunk. Pressing myself against the wall, I crept toward the window overlooking the back lawn, my hand shaking as I covered my mouth to hold back a sob. But what I saw was not a man smashing windows or charging forward in a drunken rage. It was a display of control so cold it made me shiver. Kyle stood frozen on the grass, one hand shielding his eyes from the searing floodlights pointed straight at him. The snarling arrogance he always carried was gone, replaced by raw, animal panic. He looked like a cornered beast caught in a hunter's spotlight, and the hunter was already there. Daniel emerged from the shadows of the trees, swift and silent as a ghost. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to warn. With a single, fluid movement, he twisted Kyle's arm behind his back and slammed him against the hood of the battered car he had driven here. I heard Kyle's cry of pain, but he was completely helpless, unable to move even an inch under Daniel's iron grip. No one could breach the borders of the Hale estate without being detected. A trap had been waiting the moment Kyle stepped inside. At that moment, the sliding glass door from the downstairs living room opened. Adrian Hale stepped outside. He was still wearing comfortable indoor clothes, one hand tucked casually into his pocket, his walk slow and unhurried, as if he were simply taking an evening stroll through his own garden, not facing a man who had terrorized us. His unnerving calm stood in stark contrast to Kyle's disheveled panic. Adrian carried no weapon. He didn't need one. His sheer presence, the cold authority radiating from him under the fierce lights, was enough to make Kyle shrink, his eyes darting desperately for an escape he could not find. Adrian stopped a few steps away, his voice low, not loud but carrying clearly through the cold night, each word striking Kyle like a hammer pounding down on whatever pride he had left. "I've been waiting for you, Kyle, but you've chosen the wrong place and the wrong person to challenge." I stood hidden behind the curtains on the second floor, my arms wrapped tightly around my chest, tears spilling down my face not from fear but from something overwhelming and strangely comforting. For the first time in my life, The familiar terror that had shadowed me for years was replaced by a force so powerful and protective, it left me breathless. Kyle, the man who had been the nightmare hovering over my entire existence, the man who had driven my daughter and me into the night, fleeing for our lives, now looked small, pathetic, utterly powerless under the absolute authority of Adrian. He had no chance to pry open a door, no chance to cross the threshold, not even the chance to startle us. And in that moment, the truth sank deep into my bones. Adrian Hale's protection was not soft reassurance meant to comfort a frightened woman. It was steel, a fortress, an unbreachable stronghold he had erected around my daughter and me. I sank to my knees before Adrian, my heart pounding so violently it felt as though it might burst, tears streaming as I lifted my eyes to his cold but commanding, forged in a kind of power I had never known. My voice trembled as I pleaded, begging him to end this, to make sure Kyle could never come back, that my daughter and I would never have to live in fear again. Every word was a mixture of desperation and hope, a fragile line between trust and the terror still clinging to me. Adrian stood silent, his eyes following every trembling movement I made, his quiet strength so immense I felt as though each breath I managed depended on whatever decision he came to. I told him everything, all the months of horror, every threat, every punch. Every night I lay awake watching Claire sleep, terrified he would burst through the door. Each detail made me shake, but also revealed the single thing I longed for: peace. A life no longer haunted by fear. I felt Claire's small breath behind me, her sleeping face still etched with the remnants of nightmares, and I clutched her hand tighter, praying Adrian understood that we could no longer survive in the shadow of this threat. He inhaled slowly, and I saw something sharpen in his eyes, a focus that radiated authority, as if he were weighing every step, every possibility, every outcome. I knew then that we had placed our lives in his hands, trusting him in a way I had never trusted anyone. My voice broke as I confessed I could no longer protect my daughter, that I was exhausted, hollowed out, too worn to keep fighting. Adrian nodded once, his expression still stern, but in his eyes I saw a flicker of understanding. He stepped closer, his hand not touching me but the force of his presence alone making me feel safer. He told me we would be protected, that Kyle would never harm us again, that every consequence Kyle might attempt to unleash would be dealt with completely. My heart pounded harder, tears still streaming, fear and relief tangled together, and for the first time in months, hope found its way into me. I pulled Claire closer, whispering into her hair that everything would be all right, that Kyle could no longer touch us. When I lifted my gaze to Adrian, gratitude flooded through me, realizing that his power, his authority, and his unwavering resolve had formed the wall we needed. For the first time, I believed the terror had ended, at least for tonight, at least here, within the shelter of the Hale estate under Adrian's watch. The moment I stepped out of the living room, Adrian began to move, each action precise and calculated. He called his most trusted associates, relaying detailed information about Kyle, where he might hide, who he was connected to, the debts he owed, the threats he had made, using it all to apply legal and social pressure, forcing him into retreat without needing to spill a drop of blood. I stood, outside the doorway, stunned as I listened to Adrian's voice through the phone, low, sharp, each word chosen with surgical precision, slicing clean through every escape route Kyle might have had. And I understood then a kind of strength I had never witnessed in any man before. This power wasn't for intimidation. It was protection, swift, decisive, impenetrable. In the days that followed, Adrian continued moving quietly but relentlessly. He coordinated with lawyers, private security, informants across the city, ensuring Kyle's every step was monitored. Every path he tried to take was blocked, every move limited and contained. Slowly, I realized the danger was being strangled out of existence, inch by inch, leaving Kyle with no way to reach us. I watched Adrian call people whose names I had never heard, using his influence not recklessly but with sharp intelligence. Every document, every photograph, every piece of information he had was enough to make Kyle understand that the only choice left to him was to withdraw entirely if he wanted to keep breathing. And inside me, a relief unlike anything I had known began to bloom. Claire stayed close to me, her eyes still carrying flickers of worry, but I whispered to her that everything was being handled. For the first time since we fled, she no longer panicked at every sound, no longer jolted awake at the rustle of footsteps outside. Adrian updated me often, stepping into the room to explain each action he had taken, his voice deep but gentle. And each word he spoke transferred not just information, but reassurance, strength, and a quiet certainty that no one would ever hurt us again without paying dearly for it. At last, after several days, I heard that Kyle was faltering, his movements restricted, his behavior erratic, and through Adrian's connections we learned he was trying to withdraw, step by step, cornered by the very power he had once underestimated. I held Claire tightly, feeling her heartbeat calm and steady, for the first time, and in that moment I understood that Adrian's quiet, relentless actions had transformed fear into safety, despair into hope. For the first time in months, we could breathe without bracing for danger. In the days after Kyle finally began to retreat, I noticed a subtle but profound shift in the way I saw Adrian Hale. Every gesture, every look he gave was no longer distant authority but something sincere, something warm enough to soften even the deepest wounds in me. I slowly began to realize that not only was Claire being protected, so was I. Each time Adrian slipped quietly into the living room, simply standing beside me as I prepared breakfast or settling into a chair while I read, his presence steadied me. It was protection, yes, but also gentleness, something I had forgotten existed. Claire laughed more now. When Adrian asked her about her assignments or small interests, her eyes sparkled, and I saw her learning what it meant to trust a man who was nothing like the bright one who had hurt us. The relief in my chest was almost overwhelming. The smallest moments, Adrian setting a warm cup of tea beside me without a word, a faint smile when Claire finished, a drawing began to transform the constant vigilance inside me into a surprising sense of closeness. I felt something stir within me, something I had locked away for years, a quiet trembling, a softening, a warmth directed toward a man whose strength did not frighten me but steadied me. I found my heart beating a little faster when he stood beside Claire, gently guiding her hands, his eyes occasionally brushing past mine, reading every small reaction. In those moments, his gaze held absolute protection without control, something that made me feel safer than I had ever felt, even when I tried to protect Claire alone. When my hand brushed his while reaching for a cup of coffee, I felt a faint, quiet response from him, a subtle, meaningful acknowledgement, and I realized Adrian was opening up too, not the cold, distant figure of rumor, but a man willing to stay, to witness our healing, to become part of the life I had once only wished for. Something inside me trembled each time he came near Claire, and slowly, carefully, I let myself believe that his protection was real, not an illusion, that I could lean on him without fearing the darkness would return the moment he turned away. Those quiet moments, Adrian watching Claire laugh, his gentle questions about our day, his presence steady beside mine, stirred something inside me, soft and trembling. And for the first time since everything began, I allowed myself to open my heart, to feel, to trust, to let hope take root, fragile but fiercely alive, blooming into the promise of a peaceful, warm future I had never thought possible. That afternoon, while Claire was playing in the back garden, I heard a strange sound, sharp, unfamiliar, and something inside me tightened instantly. My heart lurched as two unfamiliar figures appeared near the fence, moving, quickly and decisively. I shouted for Claire to come inside, but she barely had time to turn before one of them lunged toward her, his expression feral, his hand stretching out to seize her. I ran forward, but everything happened too fast. My body was shoved to the ground, fear exploding inside me, my heartbeat stalling for several long seconds. But then a firm, powerful stride cut through the chaos, followed by a voice deep, cold, slicing cleanly through the air. Adrian stepped out from the hallway, each step deliberate as he approached the two intruders, his gaze hard as tempered steel. Their movements froze instantly, as though every muscle in their bodies had been seized by the force of his presence. I could see the strength emanating from him in every line of his posture. He needed only a single look to bring them to a standstill, fear flashing across their faces. His command was quiet but merciless, telling them to leave at once or face the consequences, and within seconds, they bolted into the shadows, disappearing as swiftly as they came. I wrapped Claire in my arms, feeling the frantic rhythm of her heartbeat but grateful she was safe, tears spilling down my cheeks, terror mingling with overwhelming relief. I realized then that Adrian's world didn't just shield us from threats like Kyle. It drew danger of its own, danger from corners of the world I had never imagined. But with Adrian, every threat was smothered before it reached us. After the intruders vanished, Adrian looked at me, his voice low and steady as he explained that what happened was an unavoidable consequence of the world he lived in, a world laced with power, hidden alliances, and shadowed risks. I felt worry dissolve and simmer at the same time, understanding that safety was something fragile, unless backed by someone as powerful as him. I held Claire tighter, her warmth and breathing grounding me, gratitude swelling in my chest alongside absolute trust. For the first time in months, I could breathe without bracing for danger. Adrian's dangerous world, for all its risks, had become the shield that kept us alive. And in that moment, I understood that Claire and I were truly safe, at least in his hands, and for the first time, hope felt solid, something I could hold. We could live without trembling, and the bond between us and Adrian was deepening, rooted now not only in protection but in unwavering trust. I stroked Claire's hair gently, whispering that everything would be all right, that the world outside might be dangerous but we would never face it alone again. After the incident, I sat on the couch in the living room, gripping Claire's hand, my heart still thundering. I looked at Adrian and realized that the fear that once consumed my every thought had been replaced by gratitude and a new resolve. I told him I no longer wanted to run, that this time we would stand our ground and face whatever came with him. Adrian listened, his eyes steady and sharp but warm, and he nodded, understanding that I had made a choice, that the safety and trust I felt here were not temporary illusions, but the foundation of a shared commitment. Claire, small but determined, leaned into me, her eyes wet but no longer terrified. I whispered into her ear that nothing would happen now, that Adrian would protect us, that we were going to be all right. I looked at Adrian, feeling the strength radiating from every expression, every subtle gesture, and I knew then that his actions were not only protection, they were a promise, a declaration that the world outside would never again breach the boundaries of our lives. Trust took root in me then, slow but steady, and I realized that staying in the mansion wasn't a decision born of fear but of hope and the possibility of real safety. Adrian stepped closer, his hand not touching me but close enough to send a clear message that we were protected, that we were allowed to stand tall, that running was no longer necessary. He said that no one would ever harm Claire or me again, and that any threat would be dealt with. I nodded, relief softening the edges of every breath I took. For the first time in months, safety felt whole, not fragile, not temporary. Claire rose on her toes and wrapped her arms around me. I whispered that we were safe now, that this time we wouldn't leave, that staying was the right choice. Adrian watched, his gaze gentling a little, and I realized he was opening up too. Not only a guardian, but someone willing to stay, to connect. His presence formed a space where Claire and I could finally breathe deeply. I felt a bond forming between the three of us, silent, powerful, carrying the weight of something unspoken but deeply meaningful. His presence had become assurance that we could live peacefully and be cared for. I looked at Claire, then at Adrian, and in that moment, I felt strength rising from the decision to stay, from the promises on both sides that whatever dangers the outside world held, we would face them together, without running, without fear, with the belief that Adrian's protection and commitment would stand as the fortress around us. Claire squeezed my hand. I tightened mine around hers, and the three of us stood in the stillness of the living room, wrapped in a peace that had not touched our lives in months. And I knew that from this moment forward, our new life had begun, built on trust, on love, and on a promise from Adrian Hale that would not be broken. In the days that followed, I began to feel a profound difference in our lives. The sudden waves of panic and the instinct to flee were gone. Claire's days were shaped by a routine. Adrian arranged online classes, creative activities that helped her heal and grow. I stayed close, guiding her when she needed help, and I too began taking online courses, Adrian recommended, rebuilding my professional skills, reclaiming control over my own life. Each lesson, each hour, reminded me that healing wasn't only physical, it was reclaiming the parts of myself I had lost. Therapy sessions and psychological exercises helped me acknowledge the wounds I still carried, but no longer let them rule me. I learned to breathe deeply again, to relax the tension that had lived in my body for so long. Adrian appeared often, simply watching with a warm, quiet gaze, saying nothing, yet his presence alone made me feel safe. Claire grew more confident, no longer frightened by strange noises or the dark, her smile returning, her eyes bright with curiosity and joy. Meals with Adrian became small rituals of comfort moments where we talked, where I learned to let myself trust, to accept care, to feel deserving of peace without guilt. Mornings in the Hale mansion felt peaceful beyond measure. Sunlight through the living room windows, birds singing in the garden, Claire and I reading together, doing schoolwork, preparing breakfast. Every moment felt meaningful. I began keeping a journal, recording my thoughts, the smallest progress, my deeper breaths, Claire's smiles, all proof that we were healing. Adrian became more than a protector. He became a companion. He reviewed Claire's schoolwork with me, sometimes talked with me about my own decisions. His presence was gentle but affirming, reminding me I had worth, that I was trusted. Slowly, I felt steadier, no longer haunted by the past. I found myself laughing more, speaking to Adrian more naturally, recognizing that small joys and daily victories mattered as much as survival. Claire thrived, curious, joyful, stable. My heart felt lighter, grateful for these simple things that formed the foundation of our new life. And deep inside, I knew this was truly our new beginning, a life built on safety, trust, and love. A life where Claire and I could grow without fear, where we had finally found the stability we had yearned for all along. That quiet evening, after Claire had drifted into sleep in her own room, I sat in the living room, the soft glow of the table lamp settling over my tired but peaceful face. Adrian stepped in, his deep-set eyes resting on me with a tenderness I had never seen before. He didn't speak right away. He simply stood there close, but never overwhelming his presence, steadying the air around us, sending my heartbeat into an unsteady rhythm I couldn't control. Finally, he drew a slow breath and began to speak, his voice low and warm. He said he wanted me to understand that from the moment Claire and I entered his life, he no longer saw himself as an outsider. He wasn't just protecting us, he wanted to walk beside us, to be the place where I could lean, trust, and be completely safe. I felt every word, every breath sinking into me, soothing the remnants of fear clinging to my bones. Adrian stepped closer, his fingers brushing lightly against my hand. His eyes held mine steady, sincere, the kind of gaze that stripped away every doubt I had ever carried. He told me I no longer needed to be afraid, that I didn't have to hold myself together or hide my feelings anymore. I was allowed to be soft, to lean on him, to trust him, to open my heart again. His words landed like seeds of warmth, easing their way into the deepest parts of me, filling me with a growing sense of safety and something even more fragile, more terrifying affection. I couldn't hold back my tears, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were the quiet, astonished tears of someone realizing she was finally being seen, understood, and cherished. Adrian gently cupped my face in both hands, unhurried, unforceful, letting me feel only tenderness, protection, and respect. When I looked into his eyes, I saw a vow without words but heavy with meaning, that he would remain, that he would care for Claire and me, that what he felt was real and steady. My heart raced, but not with panic. There was a soft trembling instead, a mixture of fear and anticipation, hope and surrender. Adrian leaned closer, his voice a warm, unshakable murmur. He said, Claire and I were not just people he protected, we were the people he loved, the family he chose, the reason he wanted to become a better man than he had ever been. I closed my eyes and breathed in the warmth radiating from him, and for the first time in so many months, I allowed myself to trust, to feel, to receive love without shrinking away. Adrian lowered his hands slowly, a small but meaningful smile touching his lips, a smile that loosened something tight within my chest. He told me I could rely on him any time, not because of his power or influence, but because his affection was real. I glanced toward Claire's room, where she slept peacefully, then back at Adrian, feeling the delicate but undeniable bond forming among the three of us. I no longer felt alone. His protection and affection weren't illusions, they were real. And in that private moment, I felt a profound trust, a deep trembling of the heart, and a hopeful glimpse of a future where love and safety could exist side by side. For the first time in months, I knew I could open my heart without fear. My weary spirit seemed to find a place to rest in the presence of Adrian Hale. The next morning, when gentle sunlight shimmered through the trees by the lake on the estate grounds, Adrian invited Claire and me for a walk. The calm air wrapped around us, broken only by the soft lap of water and the songs of birds. I held Claire's hand, absorbing the lightness in our steps. Adrian walked beside us, slow and steady, his gaze drifting to me now and then, with a warmth that made my heart flutter. We stopped at the wooden dock, where the lake reflected the blue sky like a quiet mirror. Adrian turned to me, his hand softly taking mine, familiar, yet wonderfully new. My heart raced again. He lowered his voice, deep and sincere. "Emily," he said. He had seen everything Claire and I had endured, the fear, the pain, the strength it took to survive. I met his gaze but found myself unable to reply, overwhelmed by emotion. He continued, saying he wanted to be the one who provided absolute safety for us, not just a protector, but a choice, a commitment I could trust fully. I could feel the truth in every word. Then Adrian sank to one knee. In his hand was a velvet box, opening to reveal a simple but exquisite ring, catching the morning sun in a soft gleam. He looked into my eyes, his voice steady, warm, unwavering. "Emily, will you marry me? Will you allow me to become your family, fully and completely?" My heart stopped for a moment. Tears rushed to my eyes. Claire watched from the end of the dock, her small face glowing with hope and excitement. Every emotion I had suppressed for months surged at once: fear, relief, love, gratitude, disbelief, and then clarity. I nodded, my voice breaking but certain. "Yes, I will marry you. I want us to be a real family." Adrian smiled, gentle, triumphant, full of meaning, then slid the ring onto my finger with a tenderness that made my breath tremble. He rose and wrapped his arms around me and Claire, pulling us into a warm, steady embrace. The sunlight shimmered on the lake behind us, turning the moment into something unreal, something sacred. Adrian whispered that this was only the beginning of our future, and for the first time in months, I truly believed it. Claire laughed and hugged both of us tightly, and in that instant, I understood something deep and pure. Out of all the darkness we had survived, we were stepping into a new chapter, one filled with light, hope, and the security of a man who loved us with his whole heart. After the proposal, Claire jumped into our arms, joy overflowing in her bright eyes. As I watched her, I realized the decision before me wasn't difficult at all. It felt right. Adrian knelt gently to Claire's level, his expression soft with sincerity. "Claire," he asked, "would you want me to be your father truly?" I felt Claire's heartbeat quicken with hope. Adrian took her small hands into his voice deep and steady. "If you say, yes, I promise to protect you, to care for you, and to love you as my own daughter." Claire was silent for a moment, absorbing every word. Then her lips curved into a radiant smile. "Yes, I want you to be my real dad." I choked on a sob, not from pain, but from overwhelming joy. Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully, warmly. I stood beside them, watching the invisible threads of connection weave the three of us together, no longer strangers, no longer divided by fear or power, but a real family. Claire whispered in Adrian's embrace, saying she had never felt so safe before. I reached for Adrian's hand, feeling its warmth, its strength, and in that moment, I understood that love and protection could exist hand in hand, that Adrian wasn't just a powerful man, but a father, a guardian, a partner. Claire turned to me with her bright smile. "Mom, we're a family now." And I couldn't contain the happiness rising within me. Adrian murmured to me softly, "From now on, we are complete." I closed my eyes, absorbing the steady rhythm of Adrian's heart, the gentle breath of Claire, the warmth encircling the three of us. Peace and happiness washed over me, whole, quiet, profound. We stood together, our hearts settling into the same rhythm. And for the first time in so long, I knew deep in my soul that Claire, Adrian, and I finally had a real home, a place where love, safety, and trust were not distant dreams but living truth. All past fears dissolved, replaced by a steady certainty. No matter what the world outside held, we had each other. Adrian held Claire close, then looked at me with warm, unwavering eyes. I smiled back, feeling the completeness of the family we had become, unbreakable, whole, and held together by love, loyalty, and a protection that would never falter. And in that quiet, sunlit moment, I knew we had found true happiness, not just safety, but wholeness. My heart melted into the warmth of Adrian's embrace and the joy shining on Claire's face. We were truly a family, complete and inseparable. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a rhythm that was both hurried and peaceful as preparations for the wedding unfolded. I sat in my bedroom, holding the soft ivory wedding gown draped across my lap, the daylight filtering through the curtains, illuminating every delicate fold of fabric. I watched Claire race through the halls of the estate, laughter spilling freely from her lips, and in that moment, memories of the dark months we had survived flooded back the nights spent paralyzed by fear. The way every strange sound made Claire flinch, the bruises, the threats, the crushing dread that Kyle had carved into our lives. To see my daughter now, in a sunlit room filled with warmth instead of shadows, felt like witnessing the vast distance between the life we had fled and the life we were finally allowed to dream of. I remembered the nights I cried quietly on the landing, while Adrian was out confronting whatever dangers crept near. Us, the nights. Claire tiptoed beside me, helping me clean the kitchen in silence, the tension that ran through my bones each time I wanted to trust Adrian but feared the world he came from. But day by day, I learned to trust, learned to soften, learned to allow myself to be loved without guilt or fear. Adrian was always attentive, always watching over us, caring for every small detail from Claire's sleep to our medicines to the gentle routines that built our mornings. Every action of his made me feel seen and protected. Now, while preparing for the wedding, I realized that healing hadn't come solely from Adrian, but from something inside me as well, from facing my past instead of hiding from it. From recognizing that Claire had grown stronger through everything we had endured, I folded the gown with trembling hands and a heart overflowing. When Adrian walked in, his eyes brightened at the sight of me, a quiet smile on his face that made my heart fall into rhythm with his. He told me he was proud of us, proud of our strength, our resilience, and that this wedding was not just a celebration but a marker of our healing. I nodded, feeling that every pain, every worry, every tear had brought us to this moment. Claire wrapped her arms around me, and I held her close, feeling absolute trust radiating from her small frame. The three of us stood bathed in soft light, and for the first time, I knew that the past no longer defined us, that we had built a home of love, safety, and hope. The memories of fear now felt like a muted backdrop for the brightness Adrian had brought into our lives. In that quiet moment, preparing to marry him, I felt whole, steady, and ready to step into a new chapter, one where love and family would be at the center, where Claire could grow with real happiness, and where I, Emily, finally felt the strength that comes from healing and fully accepting love. By late afternoon, gentle sunlight spread across the garden of the Hale estate. Rows of white chairs stood neatly aligned, and fresh flowers glowed under the warm golden light. I stepped outside in my soft ivory gown, feeling a rush of nervous joy in every movement. Claire held my hand, her eyes gleaming with excitement and pride. Ahead of us, Adrian stood at the end of the aisle in a perfectly tailored black suit, his posture commanding yet softened by the warmth in his gaze as he looked at us. My heartbeat quickened when I saw Claire glance between us with a look that said we were her entire world. As the music began, Claire walked ahead, her small steps leading the way, while I followed with Daniel at my side. Daniel, who had become part of our family in ways I hadn't anticipated. All the worries of the past dissolved gradually with each step, leaving only trust and happiness. When I reached Adrian, I lifted my head to meet his eyes. He took my hands, warmth radiating through them, and in that moment I felt both his protection and his devotion wrap around me. The garden fell silent, the sounds of birds and our heartbeats the only rhythm. The officiant spoke gently of love, trust, and commitment. I absorbed every word, feeling their weight settle into my bones. Adrian squeezed my hand, his voice deep and warm as he began his vows. Emily, from the first moment I saw you, I knew you were the woman I wanted to walk beside, protect, and love for the rest of my life. Tears blurred my vision as I gave my own vows, promising to place Claire and myself first, to protect, cherish, and never allow danger near us again. Adrian's vows followed, full of honesty, devotion, and unwavering loyalty. Claire stood quietly nearby, her bright eyes blinking as she bore witness to the moment that would shape her future. When we exchanged rings, emotion surged through me so strongly my hands trembled. I slid the ring onto Adrian's finger, feeling my heart open in a way I hadn't believed possible. Adrian did the same, a soft smile touching his lips. When our eyes met again, All the past pain, fear, and loss seemed to fade, leaving only the fullness of now and the promise of what was to come. As our first kiss as husband and wife lingered, Claire burst into applause, her laughter ringing through the garden. We embraced three people held by sunlight, flowers, and a sense of safety I had never known. Adrian whispered that this was just the beginning. I closed my eyes, breathing in the steady beat of his heart and the light breaths of Claire, realizing we had truly crossed from darkness into happiness. The intimate ceremony ended in smiles, tears, and promises of a life built on love, protection, and family. As I looked at Claire, at Adrian, at the garden around us, it felt as though the world had paused, leaving only the three of us stepping into a new chapter whole, peaceful, and filled with hope. The peace we had built was like a warm, heavy blanket, comforting, but sometimes, in the quiet hours of the morning, I wondered if it was too fragile to last. 3 months had passed since the wedding. The Hale estate, once a labyrinth of intimidating corridors, had become a home filled with the scent of fresh lilies and the sound of Claire's piano practice echoing from the music room. Adrian was a devoted husband, his love a constant, steady force. Yet, I began to notice the shadows returning to his eyes. It started subtly. A phone call taken in the library with the door firmly shut. Daniel standing a little straighter, his hand hovering near his jacket pocket more often. Adrian coming to bed later and later, his body radiating a tension that even his gentle embrace couldn't mask. One evening, rain lashed against the high windows of the master bedroom, blurring the lights of Seattle into gray smears. I sat up, watching Adrian as he unbuttoned his shirt. His movements were stiff, mechanical. "Adrian," I whispered, the sound of my voice seeming loud in the stillness. "Is everything all right?" He froze for a fraction of a second before turning to me. His smile was there, the one he reserved only for me, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Everything is fine, Emily. Just business. Some restructuring in the shipping division. Go back to sleep." He kissed my forehead, but his lips felt cool. He didn't come to bed. He went back downstairs, and I lay awake, the old, familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. It wasn't the fear of Kyle, that monster was a ghost of the past, but a new fear. The fear that the world Adrian shielded us from was pushing back. The truth came out 2 days later, not from Adrian, but from the silence of the house. I had returned early from the Foundation's office to find the estate in a strange lockdown. The usual staff were nowhere to be seen. Only Daniel stood by the front door, his face grim. "Mrs. Hale," he nodded, stepping in front of me as I tried to head toward Adrian's study. "Mr. Hale is in a meeting. He asked not to be disturbed." "In his own house?" I frowned, clutching my purse strap. "Daniel, who is in there?" "It's best you go upstairs, ma'am. Claire is in the media room." I looked at Daniel, really looked at him. There was a bruise fading on his jawline that hadn't been there this morning. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Daniel, move." "Ma'am," I said, "move." My voice surprised me. It wasn't the shaky whisper of the woman who had cowered in a hospital bed. It was the voice of Emily Hale. Daniel hesitated, then stepped aside, a flicker of respect in his eyes. I walked to the double mahogany doors of the study. I didn't barge in. I pressed my ear against the wood, my breath hitched. "Getting too bold, Adrian," a stranger's voice sneered. It was a slippery, cultured voice, dripping with false politeness. "You marry a maid, play house, and think the rest of the circle won't notice? You're showing your belly. You have a weakness now, a soft underbelly." "Careful, Thorne." Adrian's voice was a low growl, the sound of shifting tectonic plates. "Mention my wife again, and you won't leave this room walking." "Touching." The man, Thorne, laughed darkly. "But we aren't street thugs like that ex-boyfriend you disposed of. We are business, and business requires stability. Your new, domestic life is a distraction. The board wants you to step down from the chairmanship. If you don't, accidents happen. Schools are dangerous places for young girls. Cars malfunction. The air left my lungs. Claire. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The room went silent. Adrian was standing behind his desk, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. Opposite him sat a man I had never seen, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, holding a tumbler of Adrian's bourbon. He looked like a viper coiled in an armchair. "Emily," Adrian said, his voice sharp with warning, Leave us. No, I said. My legs were trembling, but I forced them to move, walking until I stood right beside Adrian's chair. I placed my hand on his shoulder. I felt the tension in his muscles, coiled like a spring ready to snap. I looked at the stranger. I don't believe we've been introduced. I am Emily Hale, and in this house, we do not threaten children. Thorne looked at me, amused surprise dancing in his cold eyes. So, the little dove speaks. I was telling your husband that this world, our world, is too sharp for soft things. I have lived through things that would break you, I said, my voice steadying with every word. I survived a man who beat me for breathing too loud. I survived poverty. I survived the nights where I didn't know if I would see the morning. Do not mistake kindness for weakness, Mr. Thorne. Adrian is not weak because he has a family. He is dangerous because he has something to fight for. Thorne's smile faltered. He looked from me to Adrian, who was watching me with an expression of intense, burning pride. Get out, Adrian said softly. Before my wife decides to have Daniel throw you out. Thorne stood up, buttoning his jacket with a sneer. This isn't over, Hale. Sentimentalism will be your ruin. He walked out, the heavy doors clicking shut behind him. The silence that followed was heavy. Adrian let out a long breath and sank into his chair, covering his face with his hands. You shouldn't have heard that, Emily. I wanted to protect you from this part of my life. I turned his chair so he faced me, kneeling between his legs, taking his hands in mine. You promised me, I whispered. At the altar, you promised we were partners. Protection doesn't mean keeping me in the dark, Adrian. It means facing the darkness together. He looked at me, his eyes dark with worry. Thorne is a shark. He represents the old guard of the business consortium I run. They think I've gone soft. They think they can use you and Claire as leverage. Then we show them they can't, I said firmly. There is the summer gala next week. Thorne will be there? Yes. He expects me to announce my resignation. Then we will go, I said, standing up, and we will show them exactly who the Hales are. The week leading up to the gala was a blur of preparation, but not the kind involving flowers and menus. It was strategic. Adrian spent hours briefing me on the key players of his business world, the allies, the enemies, the ones who swayed with the wind. I absorbed it all. I wasn't just the housekeeper anymore. I was the queen on the chessboard, and I refused to be a pawn. On the night of the gala, I wore a gown of deep midnight blue, the color of the sky just before a storm. It was structured, elegant, and sharp. When I walked down the stairs, Claire gasped. Mom, you look like a movie star, she whispered. No, Adrian said, stepping out of the shadows, his eyes locked on mine. She looks like a warrior. The venue was a glittering ballroom in downtown Seattle, filled with the city's elite. The air smelled of expensive perfume and chilled champagne. But underneath, I could smell the judgment. Whispers followed us as we entered. The housekeeper turned wife. The Cinderella story. How long will it last? I held my head high, my hand resting lightly on Adrian's arm. I felt his strength, but tonight, he was leaning on mine too. We navigated the room. I smiled. I made polite conversation. I remembered names Adrian had taught me. I saw the surprise in their eyes. They expected a timid, broken woman. They found a woman who held their gaze. Then, Marcus Thorne appeared. He was holding court near the center of the room, surrounded by sycophants. When he saw us, the crowd parted. Adrian, Thorne boomed, his voice carrying over the music. And Mrs. Hale. I must say, I didn't expect to see you tonight. I assumed you'd be packing. The room went quiet. This was the challenge. Adrian opened his mouth to speak, but I squeezed his arm gently. Let me. I stepped forward, closing the distance between myself and Noun. Thorne. I was shorter than him, but tonight, I felt 10 feet tall. Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice clear and projecting to the gathered crowd. Why would we be packing? My husband has just led this consortium to its most profitable quarter in a decade. Unless, of course, you are suggesting that success is a reason to resign? A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Thorne's eyes narrowed. Success requires focus, Mrs. Hale. A man distracted by domestic novelties loses his edge. It is interesting, I countered, keeping a pleasant smile plastered on my face. That you view family as a distraction. I view it as a foundation. A man who fights only for money has a price. A man who fights for his legacy, for his family, cannot be bought. And he certainly cannot be bullied. I turned to the crowd, making eye contact with the keyboard members Adrian had pointed out. My husband is not stepping down. In fact, we are expanding. The Hale Foundation will be launching a new SIDA initiative next month to support families in crisis, because we believe that strong families build strong empires. If Mr. Thorne feels he cannot keep up with that vision, perhaps it is he who should consider retirement. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, an elderly man, one of the most senior board members, began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder. Others joined in. Thorne's face turned a mottled shade of red. He had tried to paint Adrian as weak. I had painted him as the future. Adrian stepped up beside me, his hand sliding around my waist, possessive and proud. "You heard my wife," he said, his voice cold steel. "I'm not going anywhere. And neither is she." Thorne turned on his heel and disappeared into the crowd, defeated. Later that night, as we drove home in the quiet comfort of the limousine, Adrian pulled me into his arms. He didn't say a word. He simply buried his face in my neck, breathing me in. "You were terrifying," he murmured against my skin. "And magnificent." I was terrified, I admitted, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving me shaking. "You didn't show it." He kissed my temple. "You saved me tonight, Emily. They needed to see that I wasn't just protecting you, they needed to see that you make me stronger." Life returned to a rhythm, but it was different now. I was no longer just the sheltered wife. I was a partner. But life, I was learning, rarely moves in a straight line. 2 months after the gala, summer was fading into the rich golds and reds of autumn. Claire had started at a private arts academy, her talent for sketching blossoming into something extraordinary. One afternoon, I was in the garden, deadheading the roses, enjoying the crisp bite of the air. I felt a strange wave of dizziness. The world tilted on its axis, the gray stone path rushing up to meet me. I woke up on the grass, the sky spinning above me. Daniel was there instantly, his radio crackling. "Mrs. Hale, can you hear me? I'm calling the doctor." "No," I mumbled, trying to sit up, fighting the nausea. "I'm fine. Just stood up too fast." But I wasn't fine. For days, I had felt an exhaustion that went bone deep. I had attributed it to the stress of the foundation work, the lingering adrenaline of the gala. That evening, the Dr. Adrian insisted on hiring a kind, elderly woman named Dr. Eris came to the house. She examined me in the master bedroom while Adrian paced by the window, looking like a caged tiger. "Well?" Adrian demanded as she packed her bag. "Is it stress? Does she need rest?" Dr. Eris smiled, snapping her bag shut. "Rest would be good, Mr. Hale. But it's not stress." She turned to me, her eyes twinkling. "Emily, how have you been feeling in the mornings?" The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. The nausea, the fatigue, the tenderness. My hands flew to my stomach. I looked at Adrian. He stopped pacing. He looked at the doctor, then at me. His dark eyes widening in a way I had never seen. The terrifying, powerful Adrian Hale looked stunned. "Are you saying?" His voice cracked. "Congratulations, doctor," Eris said softly. "You're about 8 weeks along." When she left, the room was silent. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding. A baby, a child with Adrian. Adrian walked toward me slowly, as if I were made of glass. He dropped to his knees in front of me, his large hands covering mine where they rested on my stomach. "A baby," he whispered, the wonder in his voice breaking my heart open. "Emily, are you happy?" Tears welled up in my eyes. "I'm scared, Adrian. The world is so dangerous. Thorne, the enemies, bringing a baby into this." "No," he said fiercely, looking up at me. "No. Listen to me. This child will be the most protected child on this earth. I will burn the world down before I let anything touch this baby, or you, or Claire." He rested his forehead against my stomach. I watched his shoulders shake and realized he was crying. The man who controlled an empire, who stared down mobsters and tycoons, was weeping at the thought of a new life. "I never thought I would have this," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought my life would be cold, empty. You gave me light, Emily, and now you're giving me a future." The hardest part was telling Claire. I was terrified she would feel replaced. She was 13, a delicate age, and she had only just found her footing as Adrian's daughter. We told her over dinner a week later. I had cooked her favorite lasagna, but I could barely eat. Adrian held my hand under the table. "Claire," I started, my voice trembling. "We have some news." Claire looked up from her plate, her eyes scanning our faces. She saw the tension, the hope. She put her fork down. "Is it bad news?" "No," Adrian said gently. "It's good news, but it's big news. I'm going to have a baby," I blurted out. Claire sat perfectly still. The clock on the mantel ticked, loudly. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then, she stood up. My heart sank. Was she running away? She walked around the table and stood in front of me. She looked at my stomach, then at my face. "A baby?" she asked. "Yes," I whispered. "So," Claire frowned, thinking hard. "That means I'm going to be a big sister?" "Yes." A slow, radiant grin spread across her face. "I'm going to be the oldest. I get to teach them stuff. I get to protect them?" I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Yes, sweetie, you can help protect them." Claire turned to Adrian. "And you're going to be a dad again?" "Like a baby dad," Adrian laughed, a rich booming sound that filled the dining room. "Yes, Claire, I suppose I am." Claire hugged me, burying her face in my neck. "I'm happy, Mom. I really am. We have so much room here, and it's nice to have more of us." The months of the pregnancy passed in a haze of joy and anxiety. Adrian was insufferable in the sweetest way, hiring nutritionists, banning me from lifting anything heavier than a book, coming home at midday just to check on me. But the world outside didn't stop. Thorn hadn't disappeared. It was deep winter when the final strike came. I was 7 months pregnant, heavy and slow. Adrian was at the office, tying up the final loose ends of the merger that would push Thorn out for good. I was in the nursery, folding tiny white onesies, when the alarm system shrieked. It wasn't the polite beep of a perimeter breach. It was the full-scale lockdown siren. The lights in the house cut out. "Daniel!" I screamed, stumbling into the hallway. Daniel was there in seconds, a gun in his hand, his face grim. "Mrs. Hale, we have a breach. Multiple hostiles at the south gate. They've cut the power. Claire," I gasped. "Where is Claire?" "She's in the library. Come with me." We ran, or I waddled as fast as I could to the library. Claire was huddled behind the heavy oak desk, her eyes wide with terror. "Mom," she cried, rushing to me. "Stay down," Daniel commanded. He pushed a bookshelf, revealing a hidden panel I hadn't known existed. "A panic room. Get inside. Lock it. Do not open it unless you hear my voice or Adrian's. No one else. Daniel, what about you?" I asked, gripping his arm. "I'm going to do my job. Go." He shoved us in, and the panel slid shut. We were plunged into darkness, lit only by the faint blue glow of the emergency monitors on the wall inside the small concrete room. We sat on the floor, huddled together on a cot. I could see the security feeds on the monitors. Shadowy figures were moving through the hallway. They were looking for us. "Mom, I'm scared," Claire whispered, shaking. "I know," I soothed, rubbing her back, though my own hands were trembling so hard I could barely feel her skin. "But Dad is coming. Daniel is out there. What if Kyle is back?" "It's not Kyle," I said, my voice hard. "It's men in suits who think they can scare us. But they don't know who we are." I watched the screen. I saw the front door blast open, but it wasn't the intruders. It was Adrian. He didn't look like the businessman in the suit anymore. He looked like the angel of death. He moved with a terrifying fluidity, a team of security operatives flowing behind him like water. I watched on the grainy black and white screen as Adrian engaged the intruders. It was brutal. It was fast. He fought not like a man protecting property, but like a man whose soul was on the line. I saw him take down 2 men with his bare hands, his rage palpable even through the screen. Within 10 minutes, the house was silent. The panel to the panic room beeped. I held my breath, pulling Claire behind me, grabbing a heavy flashlight as a weapon. The door slid open. Adrian stood there. His shirt was torn, his knuckles were bloody, and his chest was heaving. But his eyes, wild and frantic, scanned the room until they landed on us. Emily, Claire. He collapsed to his knees as we rushed to him. He wrapped his arms around us, burying his face in my stomach, sobbing dry, ragged breaths. "I'm here," he choked out. "I'm here. They didn't touch you. I swear, they didn't touch you. We're safe," I whispered, stroking his hair, ignoring the blood. "We're safe, Adrian." That night, the police cars and ambulances filled the driveway, but the silence in the house was different. It was the silence of victory. Thorne had overplayed his hand. By attacking the home, he had crossed a line that turned the entire underworld and the business elite against him. He was arrested before morning. 2 months later, on a morning where the spring crocuses were just pushing through the frost, Leo Adrian Hale was born. He had his father's dark eyes and his mother's chin. I lay in the hospital bed, the best suite in the city this time, not the cold charity ward I remembered holding my son. Claire sat on the bed beside me, gently touching Leo's tiny fingers with awe. Adrian stood by the window, looking out at the city he had conquered, then turned to look at the family he had built. The shadows were gone from his eyes completely. He walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't say anything about business, or enemies, or the past. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. "You saved me," he whispered, echoing the words he had said so many times. "No," I smiled, looking at Claire, at Leo, and finally at him. We saved each other. The journey hadn't been easy. The scars of the past, Kyle, the poverty, the fear were still there, faint white lines on the map of our lives. But they were no longer open wounds. We were not defined by what we had run from, but by what we had run toward. As the sun rose over Seattle, bathing the room in golden light, I realized that the fairy tale wasn't the wedding. It wasn't the wealth. The fairy tale was the resilience. It was the quiet Tuesday mornings, the safety of a locked door, the laughter of a teenager, and the sleeping breath of a newborn. It was the simple, profound truth that after the longest, darkest night, the morning always comes. And that, my dear friends, is where we leave Emily, Adrian, Claire, and little Leo today. Their story reminds us that family isn't just blood, it's who stands by you when the storm hits. It teaches us that even when you feel small and broken, you have a strength inside you waiting to be awakened. If this continuation of their journey touched your heart, please take a moment to leave in the comments. Let us know, have you ever had to fight for your own happy ending? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. We are building a community of hope here, one video at a time, and we are so glad you are a part of it. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and keep believing in the light.